Hey everyone, this is Charlie Albright. Hope you're all doing well. I thought I'd tackle one of the big questions I get about music and piano, and in particular, improvisation. And so the big question that I often get through messages or people after concerts or whatever is, how do you improvise? How can I get started improvising? What do you do to improvise to make stuff up? So for all of you out there who might not know, improvising is basically when you're playing something for the first time. You're creating something, you're composing on the spot live. It's almost as if you're impromptu speaking, except you're doing so with an instrument. And the neat thing about it is that it's kind of like music at its core. It's raw, unfiltered music. There's no time for go backs, no once overs, no oopsie daisies, that kind of a thing. You're basically just playing, and ideally you want it to sound as close to a composed, written down piece as is possible. Ideally it would sound no different than a composed piece, maybe even better. And the neat thing about it is because it's raw, you get that pure emotion. You get that real magic that sometimes can get maybe practiced out. If you play a piece for so long, so many years over and over and over again, you can sometimes lose that magic, that joy, that can, just because it becomes mundane to you, even if it's not to the audience. So anyway, the question that I often get is oftentimes, how do you improvise? Like, what is the process, or should I study theory? Should I study whatever? And, improvisation in general is like a huge topic, right? It's one of those things that used to be done all the time in music. If you go back and look at like Beethoven and Mozart, people were expected to improvise. Musicians were expected to improvise. In a Mozart concerto, for example, when a pianist or a violinist or soloist is playing with an orchestra, there's a whole bunch of written out music, and then the orchestra stops, and then there's just a big gaping hole there, and the soloist is expected to just play something that they make up on the spot for 5 minutes or so, 7, 8 minutes maybe. And then when they're done, the orchestra rejoins and the music continues as written. That kind of died by the wayside as more and more composers started writing in suggestions for cadenzas, and the skill kind of became a lost art. So the question I get is often, how do you improvise, or what do you do? So I'd like to kind of share what my thoughts are in terms of what improvisation is. And I kind of have this analogy that I keep coming back to that I think is a good one to use. So for me, improvisation is not about thinking about theory. It isn't. Some people, theory is their thing. I don't care for theory. Don't really like it. I think theory is great for, I think everyone should learn basic theory who's a musician. They should, maybe even intermediate theory. But from what I've learned is that the more theory you do, the further along you get, the more you realize that it basically falls apart when you get to really, more and more complicated things. Theory, in my opinion, is kind of like, it's trying to make music into a science, and music in and of itself isn't a science. So for basic stuff, it can be very useful to help, explain things. But as you delve deeper and deeper, there's just exception after exception. So again, not to poo-poo on theory or anything, I think it's important. But I think you have to always keep it in perspective that the theory is there to explain the music, and not the other way around. Okay, so for me, improvisation isn't about theory. It's not about thinking about, we're going from the 1 chord to the 4 chord to the 5/7 or whatever. For me, I like to think of improvisation as like playing with Legos, right? So when I was a kid, we had a big box of Legos, one of those big plastic container things. We stored them all in. And, Legos come in all different shapes and sizes and colors and all that stuff, right? You might have a 2x3 that's green, and you might have one of those super thin ones that's like 2x10, and then you have the little individual. They have a ton of shapes, ton of colors, all that stuff, right? So when I'm improvising, it's like taking a thing of Legos, a box of Legos, and putting the small pieces together in such a way that you make it into an object. Like, let's say you want to build a house, then you're going to take all the pieces that you have, you pull them out, and then you put them in ways to make it into a house. Or you could do it for a car or a spaceship or whatever, right? That's kind of what improvisation is. So as you're learning and you get better in improvisation and stuff, you're adding Legos to your box, right? So you can keep adding different colors of Legos, different shapes and sizes, and then in the future when you need them, you can pull them out and be like, oh, I can use this here. But ultimately, you're not like taking Legos out and then, at least when you're improvising to like try to make something sound, like a piece, you're not like cutting Legos with or sawing it off with like a saw or anything like. You're not doing that, right? You're just taking what you have and then using that if you can. Or if you need it. If not, you put it back and find another piece that you do need. You don't reinvent the wheel. So that's kind of my analogy for improvising. You have this box that's filled with these Legos, and the Legos are like musical ideas. Maybe they're chord progressions. Maybe they're little motifs, little mini parts of melodies. Maybe they're styles. Maybe that, and you're using that and putting them together. So when I'm playing a piece, I don't really know what's going to come in 2 or 3 measures. Like, I'm not thinking that far ahead necessarily, at least in terms of the notes. In terms of a structure, though, I do have something, right? So oftentimes there's a few things that are kind of in my mind as overarching things when I'm improvising. So one is the time frame that I have. So if I'm playing a concert and I have a 10-minute allotted time to do an improvisation, that's kind of in my head. I have about 10 minutes. So in that 10 minutes, I want to have a beginning and a middle and an end. I don't necessarily want to think that I have 2 minutes when I have 10, because you might run out of ideas or run out of a place to go or finish the piece way too early, or vice versa. If you only have 10 minutes, you don't want to be going off onto this 30-minute long spiel and barely make it out of the beginning parts of the development or whatever, and you run out of time. So time is a big one that I kind of keep in there in my head. Another one is the emotion and feel. What do I want to say with the piece? For me, that's really, really important, right? So do I want to convey joy or tragedy or mourning or something like that? Another thing that I kind of think of is, I think that, okay, within that time frame and within that mood or feel or emotion that I want to bring out, I want it to have, I want it to seem cohesive, right? I don't want it to sound like I'm just sitting there and then wandering around with my right hand and then wandering around with my left hand and then just decide, I'm going to go over here for a while. I want it to sound like it was a fully thought out, executed, edited piece with a beginning and a middle and an end. I want it to have a point, a direction, I don't want it to sound like I'm lost in the woods somewhere. This is a weird tangent. Have you guys ever seen Conan O'Brien? I'm going to go on to weird tangents on these things. I don't care. So I love Conan O'Brien's travels, like when he goes to other countries. So he has one where he's with Jordan Schlansky and you can skip ahead if I'm rambling. I'm just going to ramble. Jordan Schlansky is a character that Conan O'Brien often comes out with. And they went to Italy in one episode, and they were tasting wine. And like George Slansky was like smelling the wine. He was like, I feel like I'm in the woods, and you can smell the moss. And anyway, the joke was that Conan was like, oh yeah, you're lost in the woods. That was a really random tangent. That's okay. That's what these things are going to be. So anyway, back to the point. I want it to sound cohesive. So beginning and a middle and an end. I don't want it to sound like I'm lost in the woods somewhere like poor old Jordan Schlansky. So those are the kind of things that are kind of in my mind long term. But then within that, I don't really know where I'm going to be in the next 2 measures, right? Like I might know that, okay, I want to eventually move toward a climax or develop this theme into something. But I'm not thinking, okay, well, I'm going to go to a 7/5/7 or whatever, 7/4, hold this eighth. Yeah, no, I don't do that. And I think for some people that might work, but that's not how I improvise at all. It just isn't. I think if you do, the risk of doing that could potentially be like making it just sound robotic and without feel. And I know a lot of you who know me or my beliefs when it comes to playing the piano or music in general is that I'd rather miss a ton of notes and say something through the music, convey something, really touch someone through the music, than play all the right notes perfectly, technically perfect, all that stuff, but then have it just be like robotic or emotionless or I don't want that. I'd rather miss the notes and say something, then hit the notes and blah, right? So anyway, those are the kind of things that I think of long term. But in the short term, I'm just putting blocks together. So I might say, okay, at the beginning, I want to make a mansion looking thing. So I'm taking these musical ideas and putting them together to build that using those Legos. But I'm not reinventing the wheel while I'm doing an improvisation. I mean, when you're twiddling around by yourself on the piano, yeah, you can feel free to like try stuff. And if it sounds like crap, then, that's fine. But when you don't do that when you're like in a concert, at least I don't usually try to reinvent the wheel at a concert. You can try it, but I don't know if I recommend that. You can try ideas out ahead of time. And again, you're not going to ever, when you're improvising, it's not going to sound exactly the same. A lot of times people come up to me and also ask, well, excuse me, Charlie, can you replay that? Like, can you play that again? And the answer is no, I can't. I could try to emulate what I did. Like if I remember the theme and the general like beginning, middle, end type sequence that I might have done, I might be able to kind of emulate it, but it would not be the same. If I recorded it twice, the second one would be different. I could maybe emulate it close, but it would be different. Which is why I like to record stuff. And people say, do you write it down? And my answer is no, because it's too much work and whatever. But I have someone that can sometimes like come and they'll listen and they'll write it down for me. So check out my store. But anyway, that's my little ramble on kind of a very surface level view of how I improvise. If you like these kinds of, I know this is not a normal thing that I post. I have some like learn to play pianos with Charlie and stuff, but I think these kind of talks are also kind of cool. It just gives me a chance to ramble about whatever. I might ramble more about improvisation in future ones, or some other aspect of music, or some other aspect of anything, It might not be just music. I might expand out and stuff. Who knows? I just do whatever I want, because why not? That's a lot of people who saw me on those tours I did in the Midwest in particular. That's kind of like what I started saying. I was like, let's do this, because why not? And I think that maybe that's a good motto. Why not? As long as it doesn't hurt anyone, why not? All right, hope you all take care. If you have any questions, put them in the comments. Subscribe, please. Share, all that stuff for the algorithms. Find me on Facebook, Instagram, and hit the like button. It really helps the algorithm. And of course, the algorithm controls who sees what on YouTube. So that's helpful. And I'll see you guys soon. Take care.